to the TechGeek podcast on the ever growing demand of artificial intelligence, cloud, and machine learning in digital transformation. I'm Sukriti Yaduvanshi, your host for this session. The pandemic introduced us to an accelerated world of technology. Organizations opted for digital transformation, where technologies like artificial intelligence, machine learning, and cloud computing played key roles. According to reports, investments in AI and machine learning are set to reach $232 billion by 2025. Job opportunities in AI and ML have jumped by almost 75% over the past half a decade and are looking to keep growing. At 63% of enterprises expect a significant change in their organizational performance based on their AI investments and initiatives. To talk about how technology like AI, ML, and cloud are enabling digital transformation across industries today, we are in a conversation with Srivatsa Subanna, Vice President, Data Tech from Maverick Systems. Srivatsa Subanna is the Vice President at Maverick Data Tech based in India. He has 18 years of experience in management consulting, data analytics, and digital transformation. Currently, he is responsible for the advanced analytics practice at Maverick Data Tech. Welcome to the show, Srivatsa.
Thanks, Sukriti, for inviting me. I'm very excited to be here on such a well-known podcast.
Thank you so much for being here, Srivatsa. We'll just start with the questions that I have in for you. So AI is one of the career options which will be in demand for decades, while ML is ranked amongst the top for tech jobs. The promise of speed, ease, and cost optimization, while simplifying complex processes and systems, places artificial intelligence as one of the most significant digital transformation drivers. So, what kind of opportunities do you see for businesses to invest in AI and ML in the coming years, and why? What career opportunities lie for talent in the industry?
Sure, Sukriti. I'll answer the first question first. Uh, in terms of what opportunities do I see for businesses to invest in, right? So I'll break it up into two parts. One is on their tech investments. So one thing we have seen in the last few years across industries is increased adoption of the cloud. So the cloud is one place where there will be a lot of investment across industries. The main reason is that cloud helps companies to leverage AI better. So when they need increased computing ability to run complex algorithms, they can get it pretty much on demand. So they can scale in terms of increasing, the number of machines that they need or the amount of memory they need. So they can scale both vertically and horizontally. The other thing that cloud has done is there are a lot of tools available on the cloud to run AI algorithms. So what this means is that people who understand the business or are domain experts with some understanding of analytics and modeling can actually run these algorithms now. So you don't need highly specialized data scientists, because you can run more iterations. You can fine tune your algorithms. You can fine tune the models. So you don't need expert sort of data scientists, right? So that's one place where a lot of investment is going to happen. The second thing that will happen, and it's related to the cloud, is something that is called as AutoML, or automated machine learning. So if you look at the entire AI kind of development life cycle, there's one part about getting the data, then there's running the model, and then there's kind of getting the results and consuming it. What AutoML does is it combines the workflow and also the running of the models. So again, it reduces the need for expertise. The third thing, which is kind of an unfortunate byproduct with increased digitization, is that cybersecurity becomes an area where businesses will invest when it comes to AI and ML, because there'll be more fraud and risks that will come up as businesses go more and more online. So from the tech side, I think these are the three things. In terms of businesses, I'll keep it short. So broadly, there are, I would say, three areas. One is improving the customer experience. So be it understanding how customers are using the apps, or understanding where digital journeys are breaking, and then sort of re-engineering the processes by looking at how the apps are being used, That's kind of one part of it. So how do you make customer experience better by using AI and ML? The second part is marketing. So how do you reach out to your customers better? How do you target your customers better? By using some of these advanced techniques. And in addition, as I mentioned, so there is going to be more digitization, which will bring more devices on the internet. So you will see more IoT, more operations happening digitally, because of which more data will be generated. And all of this data can then be used to make sure that you're reaching out to the customer in the right way and making the right offers. The third thing, which is already happening and will kind of accelerate, is around digital assistants. So right now, digital assistants are only used, as a help desk, somewhere, where you get answers to your FAQ. But what will happen is, as these evolve and become more advanced, they will actually be able to, integrate with some of the other things I mentioned, which is recommendation engines and so on, and actually guide customers through end-to-end sort of life cycle of a sale or a purchase, right? So these are some of the things that I see in terms of AI and ML, where investments will kind of multiply in the coming years. Now, in terms of, I'll come to the second question. In terms of the career opportunities, so the traditional roles that exist today, which is, things like data scientists, visualization experts, machine learning engineers, business analysts, these will continue to exist. But what will happen is, as things are driven more and more by algorithms, certain new roles will come up. So for instance, you would have heard of algorithmic bias, ethical AI. Now, this in itself will create some new roles, such as a data ethnographer, whose primary role it is to kind of make sure that there are no inherent biases in the algorithm, or there is, no data, for instance, race data being used to give out loans, or denying loans to people who are living in, say, a particular neighborhood. Some of these biases can get built up into algorithms almost subconsciously or unconsciously. So there is a lot of governance needed around algorithms and the data that goes into algorithms. And I see a lot of new roles coming around AI governance and AI ethics in the coming years.
Okay, so that was really insightful, Srivatsa, and I have a very pertinent question to what you just spoke about. AI taking into place and how it is actually revolving the entire digital space. So, what kind of evolution do you see happening in the human-machine collaboration, especially when it comes to the modern workplaces, both on the front end and the back end?
Right. So there was a survey done, Sukriti, where they found out that only about 10% companies managed to achieve significant financial benefits from AI, right? And what they found was something very similar to what you asked, which is that those 10% of companies work very differently than other organizations when it comes to learning with AI, right? So either you can have it in three ways, right? In terms of AI systems, one is AI systems kind of evolve on their own. They uncover newer patterns in data, and based on that, models get recalibrated and you kind of see better outputs. You can have systems where AI learns from human beings, or you could have systems where human beings learn from AI. So I'll come to the different examples in each of these areas, right? So if you're looking at human machine interaction, you can almost classify it into 4 or 5 different levels. At the lowest level is where all the intelligence comes from the human being, and the human being uses the machine. So for example, if you're using a Microsoft Word or making a PowerPoint, the tool exists, but every single input that goes into creating a document or PowerPoint comes from your intelligence. At the other end, what you have is machines do everything end to end, and human being probably just looks at it, or reconciles it periodically, right? And in between is where you have options where human beings and machines combine to give results. Uh, so, for instance, there's some preparatory work that is done. So, I can take the example of robo advisors or investment advisory, where there is some preparatory work which is done by a wealth manager or an investment advisor in terms of asking questions to customers, what kind of investments they're looking for, and so on. But machines take over from data from all of those interactions, customers' risk profile, and so on, and they come up with a recommendation saying that this person fits into this risk profile, and therefore this is the advice. And then the wealth manager then uses his or her experience and then sort of ties the knot together, and that's where human beings and machines work together. There could be the other extreme where most of the work is done by machines and human beings just check. So, for instance, creating an insurance quote, right, where the model and everything runs in the background, and you have an insurance advisor who looks at it and thinks, yeah, it kind of makes sense. So, what organizations can do is make sure that human beings and machines learn from each other. So whenever a human being is making a decision to kind of supersede what a machine has recommended, then that is something that is an input to the machine to improve the model and so on. Likewise, where there could be a situation where the machine is used as a sort of second pair of eyes to validate whether whatever the human being has done is right or not, right? So what I see is that the extremes as well, which is where things are completely manual and completely automated, that will kind of stay where it is. But the other three levels which I mentioned, which is human beings working with machines and then machines working with human beings, I think that's where the machine's output can take it to a certain level, and beyond that, human being adds their intelligence. So what you will actually see is better outcomes if you're a customer, right? Because you have the algorithm making a recommendation, and you also have the human intelligence coming in. So as I mentioned, on the front end, it could be examples like investment advisory, where someone who is dealing with customers directly, like a wealth manager, can actually make better recommendations, and it could result in better outcomes. Likewise, at the back end, something on the operations side, which is done, say, completely in an automated fashion, and a human being checks it or adds some more controls to it, which can then be incorporated into a system. So that's where, again, you see the performance go up. So I think that's how the entire system will be evolved. It will not be human being versus machine or human being or machines. What we will see is that it will be human being plus machines, resulting in better outcomes.
Okay. So, a lot of things have changed during this pandemic era, be it the organizational structure or the workforce. So, looking at the current scenario, which top skills will be crucial to make the AI workforce revolution an impactful one?
Right. So I briefly spoke about the roles that exist today in data science, right? Uh, Again, the roles will depend on the maturity of the organization. One thing you see is that organizations get in data scientists and then expect miracles. But what you find is their data infrastructure is not up to the mark, which means that data scientists spend a lot of time just trying to clean data and get data which makes sense, right? So the roles that will thrive in any organization will kind of depend on the data maturity of the organization. So what kind of governance they have with respect to the data, uh, how good their data infrastructure is, uh, how well their data infrastructure is linked with their processing systems or transaction systems, right? Because at the end of the day, what happens is any model or any algorithm makes a recommendation, and that recommendation has to be acted upon in another system. So even if I, for instance, a model recommends to me that this person is probably a better candidate for a particular credit card, someone still has to call that person, enter all those details in a CRM, then follow up on the lead, close the lead, acquire the customer, right? Uh, so in terms of what roles will work, it's going to be a function of how evolved the data organization is. The second thing is how clear the organization is in terms of its data strategy. Uh, so today you might want to solve a particular problem, but you don't have the data for it. What's your strategy going ahead to acquire that data to make sure that this problem can be solved, say, a year from now, right? So that roadmap in terms of data strategy, which has to be tightly tied to business imperatives, and based on that, the kind of roles will evolve. So in an organization where you don't have a lot of data and the data organization is not very evolved, you might find that more descriptive analytics or dashboards will do the work, because that's all the kind of data you have. But in more advanced organizations where you can actually integrate models into production with processing systems, you will find that you will have more of AI, ML engineers, those kind of roles actually come in.
Okay, so talking about data science only, I would want to understand, where should organizations begin to rethink their data science talent needs?
Right. So as I said, the first thing that the organization should do is assess what their requirements are, right? What is it they are looking for in terms of their business strategy? So you are at a particular state today, and you have to do it literally function by function. So today, if I am looking at, say, marketing in a bank, how am I targeting customers today, and what's my ideal stage, right? And in between that, there is a journey. And in each of these stages, so my ideal stage is where I have an algorithm which automatically, periodically detects who my target customers are. And based on that, it kind of sends emails automatically, and it recalibrates automatically and so on. But you don't get there from the start, where uh, you're at a very rudimentary stage where you're pretty much calling every customer and asking them if they need a credit card, right? So you have to lay out that entire journey, how you're going to progress from point A to point B, and what are the intermediate outcomes you're looking for. And to achieve each of those intermediate outcomes, what is the data that you need? What then is the skill set that you need to ensure that you are achieving those outcomes, right? So for instance, you could start off with just a data scientist and someone who does data visualization. But as you progress on that journey and you find that your data infrastructure is in place, you have good data governance, you can actually then train someone who is, say, more of a business expert on some of the automated machine learning tools. Because you have the data in place, they can experiment with those and then use it to come up with better recommendations. So that's how you see it evolving.
So, as far as I understand this, it's very important for organizations to have a structure in place which records the smallest detail of laying out your strategies and your execution plan, right? In terms of hiring anyone from the data
Yeah,
science background. Right. So
right.
moving on to the
Uh,
next one. Yes, yes, please.
no, I say you've got it right, in the sense that you have to understand what you want to achieve as a business, understand where you are from a tech perspective, and then look to hire people, A, who can give you instant results, because at the end of the day, you need to show immediate results. Otherwise, folks from business lose interest in working with data scientists. And then you need to plan that roadmap to get to a stage where you will need newer skills, and then you will probably be doing things better. So the organizational, the hiring strategy, the data strategy, and the business strategy, all of them have to be in sync.
Right, right. So tell me, Srivatsa, is a non-standard data science task as opposed to a standard predictive task such as classification or regression more in demand than others in the BFSI industry?
So I would say yes and no. Again, it's a function of data maturity, but banks generally have a good sense of data, good degree of data maturity, right? Uh, but what is happening is there are some of the tech changes that are also happening, as I had mentioned. So banks are also looking to move to the cloud, right? So they are looking at using cloud to run sort of bigger workloads, and they need someone to set that entire data infrastructure up on the cloud. So something like data engineering becomes very important, right? Likewise, as I said, because banks are more mature, uh, once they get to that stage, they will also try to make sure that all of these models are running on production. So instead of more sort of skills in terms of building classification or regression models, what becomes important is the role of someone like a machine learning engineer, who can quickly take those models and deploy them in production, who can kind of stitch the data pipelines together, feed it into the model, and run it on the cloud. The other role that becomes important is something that is called as machine learning ops. Someone who can make sure that the model is deployed in production right, it's working fine, there are no errors. Now these are tasks typically data scientists don't like or don't enjoy doing, right? Data scientists are more of problem solvers. You give them a business problem to solve, they will explore the data, they'll spend days exploring the data, uncover insights, build a model and give it to you. They're not really that keen on maintaining it, right? So these other roles will kind of pick up over time, while the demand for data scientists will also be there. As you move more on the cloud, there'll be more of tech and data engineering roles that will become as critical as that of the data scientist.
Right, right. So, any which ways, what we have seen in the market is that the demand for data scientists has grown past couple of years a lot, and a lot of organizations started looking for them. And this is not just in the tech industry, but across different verticals, right?
Yeah, yeah. So while the demand for data scientists has grown a lot, and I agree, the demand for data engineers and machine learning engineers has grown at a faster pace
Oh,
in the last couple of years.
right, right. So, looking at those, we've spoken about, business problems and business strategies and other parts that any organization needs to take care of and, strategize accordingly, Shivatsa. Tell me, will we need to use a rich and complex data to solve the business problems in the BFSI sector?
I think the answer to that is partly yes, in the sense that, see, rich and complex data, you have to understand that the banking, financial services, and insurance industries are almost the pioneers when it comes to data science, right? So when I mean, you can go back like 40, 50 years when the first credit scoring model was built, probably longer than that, right? And credit card applications were no longer kind of monitored by hand by people looking at it. They were just run through a scoring engine, and based on the score, credit cards, mortgages, etc. were given. So the industry as such has a long history of using data science and analytics. What additional rich and complex data, be it customer interactions or the interactions of the example I gave, the interaction between an investment advisor and a customer, uh, all of that is additional information which is not captured anywhere. but what it can do is it can add significantly to decision making. So with the newer algorithms, be it speech to text, natural language processing, what all of these do is they help structure what traditionally has been unstructured data. And what they can do is, in addition to all the information that you already have about a customer, be it his or her transaction history, his or her demographic information, all of which you already have, this adds to that data. And actually, from my experience and also the experience of a few of the customers I've worked with, this actually improves the quality of recommendations that comes out. So while in isolation they may not be used to solve business problems, but combined with other data, they will definitely help improve the outcomes. So I'll just briefly take the example of a company which was based out of Singapore called Lendo. One of the things that they found was the battery percentage left of a customer was a very good indicator of likelihood of default. So they actually used that as an input, which is completely non-traditional data. No one would even think of it. But you are running an app on a mobile, you can actually get that information from Android or iOS what the battery percentage is, and they would take kind of an average of that and then use that as one of the inputs to decide whether to give someone a loan or not. And their outcomes were pretty impressive. So that's why using some of the ML algorithms with additional rich data, be it customer interactions, call recordings, or as I mentioned, battery percentage, all of this actually helps improve the models.
Great insights, Srivastava. Thank you so much. Additionally, I would want to know that, if I want to quantify and statistically talk, how much, has the BFSI industry already shifted to cloud, and, what is the progress that we are seeing?
So in terms of moving to the cloud, one of the main hindrances, there are two main hindrances, right? Why banks have been slow to shift to the cloud. One is they hold a lot of customer personal information, which they don't want, outside the premises. The second thing is a lot of it is driven by regulation. So regulation has historically discouraged banks from moving to the cloud. What we are seeing now is that regulators are understanding that cloud is as secure as on-premise sort of data infrastructure. So we are seeing some customers who are moving non-customer data to the cloud. But what a lot of NBFCs in India and even banks have been doing is they're using cloud as a source for computation. So in the sense, all the data resides within the bank's premises. But what they do is if they want to run a particular model, they strip out all the data that identifies a customer and sends that entire data set to the cloud. And on cloud, they can obviously purchase, higher capacity for a shorter duration of time. So they compute it there and get the results back. So it started that way. But I think what will happen over time is that leaving, all customer data outside, all the major computation will move to the cloud. At this stage, I would say the top banks are probably just starting off globally in terms of their move to the cloud. So they've signed sort of partnerships, be it with Microsoft or Amazon mostly. In some countries, what is happening is the governments themselves are encouraging industries to move on the cloud. So UK is a good example where they've almost gone ahead and recommended Microsoft Azure as their cloud partner of choice. And now banks are slowly sort of moving towards that. Very early. So we might be at maybe 5 or 10% right now. But I think you'll see this journey accelerate in the coming years. And I wouldn't be surprised if over the next 4 to 5 years, all the major banks have run their data infrastructure off the cloud.
Right, right. Thank you so much, Srivatsa. It was a great experience to have you here. Thank you so much for sharing these insights with us. And I'm sure your cognition is going to help a lot of people who are going to listen to our podcast and be helpful in terms of acquiring new skills or maybe knowing the market trends. It was a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for being here, Shivatsa.
Thanks, Sukriti. I really enjoyed being a part of this podcast. Thanks for some very, very good questions. Thanks a lot.
Absolute delight. Thank you so much.